It's Lindsay. It's November 11th, Monday, 2024. There's something that I had forgotten to talk about. Well, didn't really forget to talk about it. I just wanted to talk about it a little bit right now. Yeah, okay, so back to this whenever you're involved with somebody who, you've known them or they know you, they've been to your home. There's been a lot of issues where trust issues where you have had these feelings that you feel like that person is lying to you. They're not really who they say they are. There's something that there's dishonesty, right? Or that's what you feel because that's what your inner voice or intuition is telling you. And the person behaves in a narcissistic type way, controlling, demanding, wants all your energy and time, kind of like that, these kinds of people. And yet when you try to open up to them, it's like they don't really listen to you, or they listen but not really because they forget everything you tell them. And then it's like they're not really paying attention to anything you say because they're so focused on other things that it's difficult for them. They have it's like they have it's like they have such bad ADD, they can't pay attention. They have arrested development or something like that because they don't listen to what you're talking about, or they don't, because you have to repeat yourself all the time. Whenever you see them again, they'll forget what you had talked about the time before. Because they don't pay attention. They're so focused on flesh and touching you, or what they physical aspects that they don't. People. It's frustrating because it's like you see the person every so often, or they show up after the discard, or you discarded them or whatever, and it's pretty much over, but it's like it's just one of those kinds of situations, right, where you just know that there's something going on. That person cheated on you when they said they didn't, but then again, they don't call it cheating because you're not in a quote unquote monogamous relationship. You might think you are, but they, on the other hand, think that a monogamous relationship means that it's okay for them to actually have intimacy in sleep with other people, or whatever, have multiple partners at once, right? Where it leaves you hanging. Basically what's going on is they do this to confuse you. They do this to string you along, basically, or lead you on thinking that, eventually that it's going to be a real relationship. But no, but they lie to you. The thing is they're lying. They lie to you. They tell you when you ask them questions, suspecting that they've been with other people while they're with you, had intimacy or whatever, and they'll say no. And they're lying because they can't even look at you in the eye when they say this, and they look away, and they start getting agitated. They get nervous. They get mad. They get frustrated when you ask them these questions because you're asking them a point blank question, and they don't want to answer it, or they jump around the question to try to basically avoid the question, avoid that topic. But what I want to know, see, this is the thing with me. I can analyze people pretty well. I feel that just with my experience and the way I watch, I'm a good observation. I have observation skills. I'm pretty good at reading people sometimes, and I'm not always right about what I think, but I do know how to kind of read people, and I do feel their energies and pick up on vibrations and things like this. Now, when you're involved with somebody who has a lot of sociopathic or psychopathic narcissistic qualities, the thing about these people is they lie. They're real good at lying, and everything they basically, it's like a facade, a mask that they're wearing. Not really a mask, but it is like a mask, because that sounds so stupid when you say mask. It's not like a face mask, but a mask such that that, you know, they're not, they're portraying somebody who they're not, in other words, okay? That they're actually putting on an act for you that's not really who they are. It's not genuine. They're not really being themselves, but they feel, or they, because they completely behave differently around other people depending on who they're around. They put on a front, you know, like an act, but it's a bad. And people will say, you'll hear videos of people talk, coaches or even therapists speaking about narcissistic personality disorder, and they'll say things like, you know, they're better than any Hollywood actor or whatever, okay? Or they'll compare narcissistic people to actors. Well, everybody knows. First of all, I'm not a fan of I'm not a celebrity fanatic. I could have been, you know, I probably could have been going to that field a long time ago. I tried, you know, whatever. But I'm just saying that I'm not trying. I don't care about celebrity status personally. But a lot of narcissistic people. Okay, the difference is that with some of these stupid fucking actors that can't fucking act their way out of the paper bag anyway. They're horrible actors. They go to school. They go to school for that, and they spend years and years going to acting school and studying acting and doing all that shit. And some of them are good. They might be decent enough actors, like on the screen as well as on a stage, but they're trained to act. They're trained to act. They're following a script. They've memorized a script. In other words, it's a script. Okay. Now the difference, obviously, with people who are very narcissistic and multiple personality disorder, or even borderline personality disorder, or whatever, bipolar, some of these histrionic labels of schizophrenia, whatnot. Now they're not putting on an act that's intentional. It's not done as it's not, you know, it's just how they are. It's who they are. They're not following a script. Now with, you know, but people who are genuinely, quote unquote, mentally ill and schizophrenic are not following a script. They are just that way. They're paranoid naturally. They're just who they are, and they're usually a little bit, you know, different or odd, and they're misfits, or they don't fit in. They don't conform, and so therefore society tends to look down on them and basically treat them differently because of the stigma of mental illness and the stigma and the ignorance of a lot of people when it comes to mental illness and things like this, or people who have, you know, supposing a person was a former drug addict or alcoholic, and they went through a reformation, you know, they've reformed themselves. They're no longer doing the things that they did 10, 15 years ago, or 5 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever. They've changed. They've quit doing the drugs. They quit drinking all the alcohol. They're rehabilitated, more or less, in a way. You know, they're no longer on substance. They're not abusing drugs or alcohol, illegal drugs or alcohol. Okay, or alcohol is not illegal, but they're not abusing drugs illegally, such as, you know, what a lot of people do, and they try to keep that under the rug or a secret. But you'll find out that a lot of people who lie, who are pathological liars, and they have these narcissistic controlling qualities about them where they're hiding something from you. You can tell that they're lying and hiding behind a facade. A lot of them are closet gays, closet homosexuals or bisexuals. They're misogynistic. A lot of the times they have, and I've noticed a lot of the men who I've known throughout the years, they want to be in a relationship with a woman because they really secretly they like men. Okay, secretly they would prefer to be with a man. Secretly they're homosexuals, a lot of them, or bisexuals, but they kind of don't really know, you know, they're confused. I'm not a homophobic person. I'm not trying to say that. I personally find it strange and a bit repulsive that whole behavior thing, but that's to each his own. If that's what people do, that's what they do. I personally don't understand it myself, and it's not something I've ever gravitated towards, but I do. Throughout my life, I've known a lot of gays, a lot of homosexuals. I've known a lot of women who are lesbians and bisexuals as well. I had a cousin who was a gay homosexual man who passed away couple years ago. It's been like about 2 years since he died, or almost 2 years, I guess. My cousin Greg, who was an artist here in San Antonio. Now, Greg Menino was his name. He passed away. He's my cousin on my mom's side. He was like pretty young. I mean, he was in his 50s. He passed away from pneumonia. I mean, he died at a pretty young age, and it was kind of out of the blue. I wasn't expecting, whatever. He died, and he seemed to be doing really well. He was healthy. He got really sick from pneumonia one day and just passed away. But yeah, it was a shame because he was a real cool person, but he also had a lot of issues as well, as a lot of people do. And the thing with that is that they say, and you can argue about this can be an argument, but a lot of what I have researched and read about, and from what I've even heard from some gay people throughout my life over the years, is that it's something that the way they are raised by their mother that kind of brought on that gayness, or they usually were raised in a home. And also a doctor named Dr. Lorraine Day talks about this. She was a trauma surgeon out of San Francisco, and she's dead now, passed away, but she used to have a lot of patients who were gay with AIDS and whatnot in San Francisco area. So she knew a lot about these stories and whatnot, or their lives. But a lot of them were brought up in homes where there was an absentee father, or the mother was, or they were born a bastard child, born out of wedlock, whatever, or adultery, an adulterous affair. The father was not really in the picture much, so the mother was raising, and maybe they had a stepfather sometimes, or the mother had multiple partners throughout that child's life, and so the child never really had a sturdy father figure, or maybe they did, but that father figure may have been abusive and domineering, and maybe didn't give the child, and I'm talking about boys here mostly, didn't give the son much attention because there are other siblings who maybe had a different father, or maybe they had that father, and the one who didn't have that father, but he's a stepfather, didn't necessarily treat that kid that well, or maybe he did, but there was a little bit, you know what I mean? It's things like this. It's kind of like the blended family where, the mother has kids from a different father, and the father's not around, but then she ends up meeting someone else. Maybe she gets married to that man and then has kids with him. So there's a bunch of step siblings and whatnot, and they don't even know that they're half siblings. The mother never tells them, but then they find out, kind of like what happened to me in my situation, where I find out at age, well, I always suspected there was something weird, but I find out much later in life that the man who raised me as my quote-unquote biological father is not my biological father. And so I was lied to my entire life, and basically always treated differently, kind of the black sheep of that family, but treated differently. And that's why. Okay, and there was always a lot of hostility and competition amongst myself and this half-sibling brother, who we don't look alike. We have nothing in common. We went to different schools. He was all, it's like there was a lot of rivalry going on the whole time, and I never understood that when I was a kid. I was like, why is he such an asshole towards me? Why is he such a bully? He went to Kincaid. He had all the rich friends with money mostly, and he was real arrogant and pretentious and mean to me for the most part, just was a bully. And I used to be terrified of him growing up, and come to find, and I was like, this guy's not my, I remember going, when we would go visit Ben every other weekend, my alleged father, Carter and him never got along. Like Carter, they just never, it's like they're complete strangers, and it was obvious that there's no resemblance, that it's not his son. And I had to go see my Ben Baldwin every other weekend, and he would often be drinking, or he was an alcoholic, but still I thought he was my father, but I kind of wasn't sure. I was like, what the fuck? There's just weird stuff. There was something weird going on. And then of course, when my mother when they got divorced, when I was a child, like in the 70s or whenever, I I was born in 75, and that divorce started happening when I was about 3 years old. They're already getting a divorce. So, and it dragged on in the Harris County courts for years. The divorce between my mother, Kenny Griffith, is her maiden name, Kenny Griffith Baldwin, and Ben Armistead Baldwin Jr. That thing just went on and on and on. And at the time, she had an attorney by the name of David Berg, who was I guess at that time he was a family law attorney from Houston, now he's a very prominent criminal defense attorney. I don't know if that was his practice back then. I'm not sure, but he was the one representing her throughout that divorce. And that thing, I just remember so much confusion and chaos throughout that time in my life, but I was too young to really understand anything. I just went to school and did my own thing. But everybody, I remember, my friend, I was still kind of a reclusive, weird, loner, artistic kind of kid doing my own thing. But it's like everybody knew something. Like all these people I knew, like these little friends I had and whatnot from elementary school and kindergarten or the Montessori school at the time. It's like they all seemed to know something, and they would gossip about me. But back then I didn't know anything about I just knew that they were laughing at me a lot and talking about me. Even the teachers would. And it's like, what do they know that I don't know? I would think, like, what's going on? Because nobody was telling me anything, but they all seemed to know something. And in retrospect, I think it had a lot to do with, they knew, I guess they gossiped parents gossip amongst one another. I was living in West University or River Oaks at times, going to private schools and sometimes public schools. So, there's a lot of gossip amongst the church, Palmer Episcopal Church, where I attended regularly. So I knew people in the community knew me. Whether I knew them or not, they kind of knew who I was, or they knew my mother. And my mother was a psychotherapist. And at that time, I don't know if she had her private practice just yet, but eventually she went into private practice, and she practiced mostly marital counseling, stuff about families and marriage and relationships. So she was a therapist, a psychotherapist with her own practice. And so I was kind of like the scapegoat kid who was sort of the test subject, being shuffled around from school to school, from one psychiatrist to the next at a young age, given diagnoses and going, so it's like all that stuff started at a very young age for me. And a lot of it had to do with when that divorce was going on. And I know that there was like some kind of breach of contract. I just know that there's something that the reason they got divorced had a lot to do with the fact that I believe, because he's not my biological father. And that's one of the main reasons, because she had an affair, an adulterous affair, when she was married to Ben, where they met at UT Austin, when he was in a fraternity, something called SAE, I think. My mother was in a sorority called Delta Phi, whatever the fuck. Sorry, I don't know what it's called. They're in sororities and fraternities at UT Austin. I know that much. And then, and my dad also went to Washington and Lee. He went to UT. And then he was in the advertising agency. He worked at Reeves Smith Baldwin in Carlsberg. He was a president of the advertising agency for a long time, and he's very creative with all that kind of stuff. And he was just very narcissistic, a very kind of narcissistic man, And I don't know what ever happened. They got divorced. I know he was drinking a lot. He probably had an affair. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure that had something to do with it. But also, I don't think he's my biological father. I'm still not convinced that he is. There's a possible chance he's my biological father, but honestly, the way I resemble his brother Alan Baldwin, the younger one, it's kind of like an uncanny resemblance where I think that I'm most likely that's my father. That's what I think. And of course, that's a big secret, because I believe that Ben, my alleged father, Ben Jr., was impotent. I don't think he could even have kids. He was, and that's probably, and so I don't know who Carter's father is, but I know that my mother knew that man, Bob Sussman, from a long time ago. And I think that at one point, maybe she got pregnant like a sperm donor and he was maybe the sperm. I don't know exactly what, but I just know that Ben is not Carter's father. That she could have had an affair with David Baldwin, the cousin from Georgia, who lives in Athens, Georgia, who, that could be. I'm not sure what's going on, but I just know that we have different fathers. I'm not 100% sure who my father is. I'm certainly not 100% sure who Carter Armistead Baldwin's father is, my half-sibling. I do not know. My mother knows. They know, but they don't want me to know. And I suspect that it could be Bob Sussman. It could be that man is Carter's father. They look alike. My mother was married to him at one point. He died. He was a Jewish man, criminal defense attorney, and Carter looks a lot like him. He acts like him. They have kind of the same voice, a lot of the same characteristics. And I'm like, well, maybe that's his father. I don't really know. And Bob, by the way, was buried in a Jewish cemetery in Houston, but his funeral was at a place called Carter and Bradshaw, which is a funeral home on West Alabama in Houston. And it's like, well, that's kind of strange that this funeral home called Carter and Bradshaw, and I remember going to the funeral. There were so many people there. It was packed. And then I went to the cemetery for the funeral services of the Jewish cemetery off of I-10 West in Houston, where he was buried at this Jewish, whatever, because he was Jewish, man. My mother always seemed to get involved with the Jewish men, David Berg, these men who were Jewish, and they were usually, had money, or they were either criminal defense attorneys or whatever. And she'd get involved with these narcissistic Jewish men that were just kind of crazy, a little real, like hyper and crazy, neurotic in a way. And I spent a lot of my childhood around these kinds of people, even living with them. And it's just kind of, they're very hyper and narcissistic and very, it's hard to, I've been around a lot of them throughout my life at school and living with them and the people I've known. So I know that some of them can be extremely hyperactive and very, it's hard to explain because I've been around a lot of different kinds of people throughout my life. I've worked for a lot of Jewish people, lots of Jewish employers. A lot of the places I worked, the women, the owners were Jewish at the companies. And I know, so I've been around it a lot, and they have a certain way of doing things. It's different, and it's a little bit, sometimes it's kind of, if you're not a Jewish person, they call you a goyim. If you're not, I don't know much about the Talmud, or I know a thing or two about it. I researched this stuff, but I knew that I was raised Episcopalian in the Episcopal Church, and I was mostly going to private Episcopalian schools or public schools, a mix of those two. And I was just living in a upper kind of middle class areas throughout my life. And I was pretty much a normal kid, except I was depressed a lot. And I had some issues with that, but anxiety and depression. And I was just kind of strange. And but I was not a bad kid getting into trouble or anything. I just was sort of, weird, I guess, or not, just kind of on doing my own thing all the time. Very independent and creative. That's, I guess, how I would describe myself, as very independent, stubborn, and creative, and always into music and art and cats and things that I still like to this day. Just things that are cemeteries, death, the occult, all that stuff. It's gone back to my childhood since I can remember. And so, whatever. So I'm talking about things, I'm going on a tangent, but my point is that, where am I going with this? Well, so these back to narcissistic people, how they just kind of feel entitled to you as a person. They see people as like an extension of themselves, that you're not supposed to be independent. They don't want you to be independent financially. They want to control your emotions, your finances. They seem to think that you are merely an extension of them and that you're here to serve them like a servant. That's how they think, a lot of them. And it's like, well, no, I'm my own individual. I do my own thing. I have my own likes and dislikes, and that's who I am. But they don't seem to understand that like you are a separate person from them. That's hard for them to grasp. It's hard for them to grasp that you are an autonomous person who has your own likes and desires and needs. And if it has nothing to do with them or fulfilling their desires and demands, then they kind of kick you aside. They find someone else to take your place, and then they get tired of that person. They toss them aside. Then they try to come back to you and like hoover you, but it normally doesn't really work well because they find that whatever they're looking for, they're never going to find it because it's really a void that they have to fulfill that they haven't found. And so they're looking for that in other people to fulfill that void because they haven't found an outlet yet. They rely on people for validation. And we all like validation. We all like, everybody likes compliments and, that's human nature. But with narcissistic people, they're so codependent on the reactions and validation of others that they don't know how to self-validate or introspect very well because they haven't ever been